Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Well, the battle for Robotyne continues. Heavy fighting is being reported within the Robotyne pocket. Specifically, very heavy fighting has taken place in the southeastern quadrant of the Robotyne pocket as Ukrainians attempt to widen and expand the salient pocket that they have created in their ongoing offensive. Specifically, some of the most heaviest and vicious fighting is taking place near Robova in this area right here. We will go over to the Rondelli Foundation map and have a look at exactly what's happening in this area. So essentially, you have a main road or a road that runs towards Verbova. And the Ukrainians are attempting to press down this road. Now, not shown in this map. Obviously, this map, this satellite footage was taken some time ago. But there runs a trench line along this road to Verbova. And the Ukrainians, again, have cleared out, or are trying to clear out, this trench line that runs parallel with this road, kind of in a west to east, southeasterly type of direction. And again, Ukrainian infantry, tanks, MRAPs, armored fighting vehicles, Bradleys are really getting hammered on this main road. Again, they can get off this roadway, but the Russians are very quick to deploy fast-deploying minefields delivered by multiple launch or artillery munitions, and it's very difficult for the Ukrainians to operate off the roads because of the risk of the amounts of mines that the Russians are utilizing. Even the recent destruction of the Challenger 2 main battle tank, that tank, we believe, was initially disabled by a Russian landmine. After that, the tank was then attacked by a Russian anti-guided weapons team, anti-tank guided weapons team, firing possibly a Kornet missile at that vehicle. But we don't see right now the pocket widening. And in order for the Ukrainian offensive to be successful and then continue, let's go back to the deep state map and to continue to penetrate further south through this multiple layers of defensive lines, they are going to have to widen this pocket. If they don't, they are risking being obliterated by Russian artillery and the use of Russian attack drones that are very, very prevalent now on the battlefield as they are being mass-produced in great numbers by the Russians. Both the Shahid drone, which was an original Iranian drone, but more importantly, Lancet and variations and new variations of the Lancet are starting to make an appearance on the drone on the battlefield with enhanced capabilities. Now, I wanted to talk about another issue that's within the confines of this conflict, and I think it's very important. Here in the United States, no matter where you look on the political spectrum, there is support for this war, meaning people in the United States, Democrat, Republican, and I would define those individuals as the low information voter, are all in on the U.S. directly supporting the Ukrainians. Now, why is this? Well, we have seen the Democratic Party over the course of the last few decades really become the party of war. Many of the conflicts that the United States has entered on the grounds of quote-unquote humanitarian operations, Libya, Kosovo, Yugoslavia, those wars were initiated by the Democratic Party. Now, obviously, the invasion of Iraq, a catastrophe. The invasion, while well planned and well executed, the post-invasion of Iraq did not go well. Republicans. And ultimately, again, Democrats, continuing the conflict. But what is the main reason that specifically the Republican Party here in the United States, the side of the Republican Party that is not going to vote for the former president of the United States, what is their reasons for entertaining support for the Ukrainians? What is the message? What is the narrative? Well, I'll tell you what it is, and you hear it from Nikki Haley. I was on the road going to work yesterday, and I was listening to the George Brockler show, a local conservative talk radio. And again, the same narrative that you hear from Nikki Haley, you hear from the Ladybug, it is the same, and it's very important to understand it is a false narrative. And I don't even think that when you hear Nikki Haley, when you hear George Brockler, when you hear these individuals talk about the Ukrainian war, the Russian-Ukrainian war, and why the U.S. must support the Ukrainians, is that reason valid? And here's the reason. This is the reason that the other side of the Republican Party and large elements of Democrats as well, and again, most of these are very low IQ voters. They don't understand history. They cannot compare and contrast former conflicts to present conflicts. And if they do, they try to match what has happened in the past to what is currently going on now. For instance, the Sudetenland with Czechoslovakia. If Western powers would have stood up to Adolf Hitler, then the early conquests by Hitler would not have occurred. And they compare that to what's happening in Ukraine. So, for instance, the leading theory is, and let me go back over to the Rondelli Foundation map. It's a little easier. They contend, okay, the individuals that support the U.S. efforts to help the Ukrainians in perpetuity, no matter what, even if it leads to all-out war, they're fine with this. And that reason is if the Russians are successful in Ukraine in taking whatever territory in Ukraine, be it the eastern portions of the Donbass, east of the Dnieper River, or the whole of Ukraine, the low IQ narrative is that the next phase will be a Russian invasion of Poland. And then finally, Western Europe will fall under the jackboot of the Russian Federation, as if it is guaranteed to happen. So first, that is just nonsensical. The military capability of the Russians, and I'm going to get some pushback on this from the Russian supporting viewers who watch this. And I get it, and I'm fine with that. But a Russian invasion of Poland would be catastrophic for Russia. Catastrophic. Catastrophic militarily. Now again, these pro-war Republicans, pro-war Democrats, low IQ voters contend that Russia would just sweep into Poland, and then eventually they would sweep into Western Europe, Germany, France, and then they say, well, basically, Putin would rule all of Europe. Nonsense. Utter, absolute nonsense. So first, you have to look at the reasons why Russia entered Ukraine. We have to acknowledge that all nation states have spheres of influence, and especially large, powerful nation states. It's just the way it is. The United States has spheres of influence. The United States is not going to allow an adversarial nation to gain a foothold in Canada, and they're not going to allow a foothold to be gained in Mexico. And the United States watches very closely capabilities that are in place in Cuba, i.e., the Cuban Missile Crisis. The United States was not going to allow missile systems to be placed in Cuba, and they threatened military action against the Soviet Union to prevent that. The Chinese have spheres of influence. So the Russians also have spheres of influence, especially if you look at history. If you look at the multitude of invasions originating from Western Europe into Russia. Russia has never invaded Western Europe. Never. The only invasions that have occurred were Western European nation states invading Russia. Now, I'm going to get it. Oh, you're a supporter of Putin. You're the voice of Putin. You're the VOR, the voice of Russia. I'm the voice of reason, the voice of history. And the simple fact is, Napoleon attempted to invade Russia. The Kaiser attempted to invade Russia. Adolf Hitler attempted to invade Russia. During the Bolshevik Revolution, Western nation states, including the United States, sent troops to intervene on behalf of the White Russians in the Russian Civil War. How many Russian troops were sent to the U.S. Civil War, the first Civil War? 0. Now again, the Russians look back at history, and they look at Ukraine, and they understand that Western nation states, especially neoliberal Western nation states, have designs on Ukraine. It is a simple fact. The overthrow of the Russian supporting government in Ukraine, not through an election process, but through physical force and violence of masses on the streets, overthrew the Russian supporting government in Ukraine. And thus a civil war started. Eastern Russians, Eastern Ukrainians supporting Russia and the former government broke away. But again, back to my rationale in terms of this false narrative. Okay, if the Russians succeed in Ukraine, they will then take over Western Europe. That is simply not going to happen. The Russians would be militarily defeated in a really bad way if they tried to enter Poland. Now you would say, well, we don't want that to happen. The United States doesn't want to have to send boots on the ground. Okay, that term, boots on the ground, to defend Poland. The United States would have to send very few ground forces to defend Poland. The U.S. Air Force, combined with the Polish military would be enough to prevent a Russian invasion of Poland. It would just be catastrophic. I've talked about the use of air power and the need to have air supremacy on the modern battlefield. That is one reason why the Russians are eventually going to win this war in Ukraine. That is one reason why the Ukrainians are not going to retake much of this territory. And in all likelihood, if the war continues to escalate, the Russians are going to build up and launch renewed offensive operations against the Ukrainians. Again, not just through the expanded ground forces, but through an expanded air force and new doctrine. But Ukraine is different than launching a military operation from Belarus and Ukraine into Poland. It'd be very difficult. You would have, in all likelihood, the French Air Force becoming involved, which is a very good Air Force, very good aircraft, incredible technology. And yes, the U.S. is greatly ahead of the Russian Federation in technology, especially aircraft. It'd be very difficult for the Russians to launch a successful invasion into Poland, with the U.S. providing air support to Polish forces. Now, again, the low IQ voter then says, well, then Poland would fall, then Germany and France would then fall, of course, under the jackboot of the Russian military. It's so nonsensical, so ridiculous, so far-fetched. But it's the narrative that is used to say we have to stop aggression. Okay, well, then stop aggression. Because putting military bases around Russia, incorporating elements of the former Soviet Union into this Western bloc, this Western military alliance, is not doing anything but antagonizing Russia. If the same thing was happening to the United States, and I've talked about this in another video, that if our spheres of influence were in jeopardy, and aggressor nation states were putting bases in Canada and Mexico, right on the border with the United States, while at the same time instituting policies through its intelligence agencies to agitate the population inside of the United States would take action. The United States would not allow an aggressor state to gain a foothold in Canada or Mexico. The United States would go to war to prevent that. And that's what is happening in this conflict. The Russian Federation has decided to go to war because its spheres of influence in a main route of historical invasion into Russia proper is at risk to coming under the control of a Western neoliberal military alliance that, let's just face it, does have expansionistic policies. Not of the same flair as Adolf Hitler, but under the guise of neoliberalism. You must think like me. You must accept this under humanitarian reasons. And if you don't accept this under humanitarian reasons, then that is violence. And you must be defeated. We will attack you now because we do not agree with the way you run your country. And here we are. Here we are. So again, the likelihood is so incredibly nonsensical when you hear these neocon Republicans and Democrats talk about why the U.S. is supporting the Ukrainians. The cost versus benefit is simply not there. The cost is going to be greater than the benefit. Russia is not going to allow Ukraine to fall under Western influence, and if they have to, they're doing what they're doing in terms of seizing territory. Just like the United States would do if Canada and Mexico were to fall under a foreign adversarial state. We would go to war, the United States. And that's what's happening within the confines of this conflict. Don't be that low information IQ voter that is telling people that we have to save Ukraine because Western Europe is next. Don't follow the CNN narrative of you have to prevent a Russian incursion into Ukraine because next the Russians will move into Western Europe. It's not going to happen. The Russians do not have designs on Western Europe. They have not had designs on Western Europe. The U.S. and neoliberal nation states do have designs on Ukraine. So that's where we sit for today. We are going to continue to watch the battle for Robotyne as it continues. And we are also going to continue to watch other hot zones in the conflict. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. As always, have a good day.